Ranjit, is it clear for you, the audio? Or is there
I can hear you, Mr. Sadanand. No, it's fine. I can hear you.
Is it hazy?
Slight sort of reverb. Do you have headphones? Or
Namaskar.
You're wearing headphones, right? Oh.
A very warm welcome to you in this 69th session of Art Matters. 69th that the Raza Foundation, in collaboration with the India International Center, has been organizing. These have been difficult times, and we have to now come online rather than live before each other. We are starting a sub-series from today, Visual Arts in Corona Times. Next month, we have Poetry in Corona Times. And thereafter, Theatre in Corona Times. We're trying to explore what's happening in the arts during this pandemic. Now, there are several aspects that we can think of. One is this forced isolation. Has it affected the art practice in some ways? The physical absence of others is very severely affecting the performing arts. Is that also affecting the visual arts? How are visual arts responding to the pandemic, the lockdown, the cruelty and meanness of the state, the helpless migration, the crass public discourse, etc.? Has the absence of the critical eye, the social eye, created any discomfort? How are artists trying to survive aesthetically the man-made disaster? Is it too early and premature to think of art in the pandemic and post-pandemic art? Would art online emerge as a significant art practice? Is the organic and symbiotic relationship between art and reality going to change in crucial ways, or going to be there and financial crisis for the visual arts? Is art withdrawing from its role as interruption, resistance, and dissent? And I want to read a poem by Ranjit Hoskote's new collection called Hunch Prose. The poem is called Fury. In whose drooping shade our nation's fate is ready today, is read today. Sorry. In whose drooping shade our nation's fate is read today. By what fury charged with bile? By what fury hellfire drunk? By what fury crying havoc? By what fury gorged on itself? By what fury unopposed? By what fury? I think that puts, in a sense, what is. Now we have this evening three very important persons from the world of visual art. Mithu Sen is a conceptual artist who performs her work in a variety of media to explore and subvert hierarchical codes and rules, with particular reference to the myths of sexuality, language, market, and marginalization. She has challenged the standards of social exchange, undermining the codes we come to rely on. She has exhibited and performed widely in museums, institutions, galleries, biennales, etc., the world over, including 9th Asia Pacific Triennale of Contemporary Art, 9, Brisbane, Tenshin Memorial Museum of Art, Ibaraki, Guggenheim Museum, Art Basel, Tate Modern, Performing Artist of the Year by India Today in 2020. And she lives and works in Delhi. Ranjit Hoskote is a poet. I have given you the evidence of that already. Theorist and curator. His seven collections of poetry have been published. He has translated 14th century Kashmiri women sense poetry, I Lala, and he was our curator for the first ever national exhibition in Venice Biennale in 2011. She has received the Sahitya Academy Award, the Raza Award, and has been advisory committee JNAF Mumbai, and he is happily for us the trustee of the Raza Foundation. And Sadanand Menon is a well-known arts editor, columnist, photographer, art curator, and stage lights designer. He has been linking media, the academy, and the arts. He has advised National Museum, Lalit Kala Academy, National School of Drama, National Gallery of Modern Art in Bangalore, and the Indian Institute of Advanced Study in Shimla. He is a trustee of the Raza Foundation, managing trustee of Spaces, and is on the advisory board of Mark magazine. He has been particularly instrumental in bringing to attention and appreciation works of the choreographer and dancer Chandralekha and the designer and painter. So, here are the three persons going to talk to you about art in Corona times. And we'll start with Mithu Sen. Mithu.
Thank you, Ashokji. Thank you, Raza Foundation, trusting me to put in this most challenging panel. I think it's equal to COVID time. I can't believe that I'm sitting with Ashokji, Sadanand, and Ranjit. But it's an honor for me. And I would like to, because I'm not a speaker and I can't really talk. When I talk, I really lecture. So I prefer to do a little presentation, maybe 10-15 minutes. And then I talk. So it's Sandeep ji, if you can just share the screen. Well, when it is about COVID, when I was trying to prepare a presentation in the morning today, so it's not an autocorrect, but by default it became void. So that emptiness that we are, coexisting with, and a state of missing something, missing someone, like that whole that paradoxical situation with our life before and during and after COVID. So before I start, I just like to say a little bit of the main area of my practice, where which is committed with that the perpetual unsettlement and constant becoming of myth. So myth and unmyth and radical hospitality, that is the area I like to kind of move around. And while talking about radical hospitality, where the myth of the constructed social needs and conditions I was trying to address, like all my life until COVID. That hospitality, the good hosting, the critiquing the hospitality, good hosting, extension of generosity, reciprocity, and suddenly the COVID came like a joke. So this whole myth unmyth binary and this subverting that myth and the politics of myth uh, suddenly kind of made a full stop. I mean, not really, but the whole, I just found that my idea about radical hospitality, that providing the discomforts of human interaction, to cultural, institutional space and social norms, the relationship between the guest, host, hospitality, and the tolerance, questioning, redefining the imposed etiquettes in hospitality. That was all about I was engaged. So pre-COVID, my practice and the politics of how to become a successful artist. So one it is about capitalism, that expectations, demand and supply in the market. Just click the that was the politics I was playing around, how to present myself and as an instructional mode. And I set up 10 instructional points and my flavoring and the satire of this time as a woman artist from Global South that got the expectation, the market, everything. And then the COVID came. Suddenly, that film, the 1 minute performative video, was made in 2009 for a presentation in Berlin. And then when the corona came, we suddenly realized that suspended, elongated present time of state of a post-cognitive sensory space that is still forming or maybe will ever unform. It's not that we became very numb during this COVID. It's a different kind of physical numbness. We are already experiencing the numbness with our fundamental government, with a lot of unfairs, with the politics around us. We had lots of issues already. And then COVID added, an imposed unreal situation. Depression, frustration, death, everything overpowered our emotion. At the same time, that upsurge of xenophobia, domestic abuse, everything, like literally we became numb. And at the same time, we saw how the whole real world is migrating into a virtual world, the online world. I physically could not make a single tangible piece of art for first 9 months, from March 2020 to December 8th. The day I remember because that was the farmers' protest day. The first artwork I made for them. And then I started making a series called Until You Unhand. This is a series of white on white, ephemeral, almost invisible. I started asking people, interviewing them online, what they want to see now as an art image. Most of them say like they don't want to see any more darkness, death, depression. They want some light. They want something, happy images. I started collecting the images, happy images. I forced myself to do these things. I couldn't make it in color. So all those happy images, ironically, became I used the picking, like how Zarina Hasmi used to do, and many other artists. So the whole process was by wounding or scarring or pricking the paper and evolving the happy images. And for the last couple of years, while I'm working and my main work is becoming a piece of contract in a semi-legal court paper, and I write each contract that what I've done, and the tangible production of whatever art, as material are my byproducts of this process. So this is one work or one series I started making after 9 months of, that impregnated with voidness. Another thing during outbreak of this COVID, I experienced, I rather would say like attacked. Maybe today is one of those kind of days that the world, the art world, demanded artists to respond. Even before we process the experience and the emotions, Zoom funerals or like kind of heartbreaking news and burning hearts everywhere. That there was I understand that art always is therapeutic. Art always gives human a way of kind of when we are in the crisis they show us some kind of hope. But artists also as a human, the immense pressure of becoming an online author um, was it brought me a lot more depression and fatigue. Um, but still, I continue. So in different kind of interview or not interview, like presentations, I tried to play the heteronymous role of an artist, like the performativity of online performance. I tried to understand this medium. So one was last year, May, June, where the expectation of seeing the artist or seeing the face after uh, social distancing, period, or during that we couldn't see each other. The entire time, 1.5 hours, I was present as a cancelled banner. I spoke from behind the screen. I answered. I presented whatever. Like it was a discussion, so there was nothing to present. But the time it was just like this. Last year, I was invited for a 72 hours long live stream, live virtual residency from Berkeley, the South Asian Institute. Again, the 72 hours and such a lucrative platform like brand name like Berkeley, but also at the same time it was such an inhuman fatigue. Like providing you that it's a not greed, but it's an excitement that I'll be holding or a platform from Berkeley, uh, but we could not imagine the story behind. So what I started doing is um, I started selling that 72 hours to different professionals and artists. Definitely not with money, but with the name, the brand name of Berkeley, and I have given the hosting power to each one just to subside that so that I don't have to be constantly online and like it's this, like how I can do the digital and online capitalism and also the strategic collaboration. It has a 72 different kind of products people can sell themselves, their skill, their profession, their whatever, So it was a couple of months I worked for that, and then that was another project I did. As it's called Berkeley for Sale. What I continue doing is like my social media that I'm doing for last many years, just to play the role of an artist as a myth, because parallelly I run two different social media where I keep posting things. Like you can see on the right side, it's a very familiar palette of Mithu Sen, what she does, like a drawing, sexual, erotic, and like sensual drawings. At the same time, that pink and red and flesh palette, and then the opposite, I have another one which is always gray and text based and different kind of, like this online, the social media is a very democratic, vast medium. You don't know where the audiences are coming from. These audiences are coming from different, it's actually very liberating, And if you see, like my followers for my marketable presence as an artist is only 2,472, whereas the other one is 9,000, 2,000. So, it's quite fun. I feel very liberated. I feel empowered that I'm not trapped as an artist of a particular style or skill that market constantly wants to, put in a box, or, like the art world market in the sense, not just the, So this is a kind of my post during last 1.5 years, where I can really speak, say something, and my own poetry, which is like, because I'm not a poet and I'm not a, my English is not my language. My mother tongue, my language is poetry. And I try to communicate through English because I can reach out most, and this is the only language that is more, universally connected. It's a vernacular language for me, and I get vernacular readers, speakers, and I collect them. So it's like a diary, every day my feeling, immediate, ephemeral, emotional, also sometimes political. It holds that temporary moments. So, like when the pandemic started, this global crisis as an artist, how we see as raw material, that there is the humor, the satire, that sadness and depression, and then things to undo, that challenge and motivation. Another work I started during this pandemic was the QR code. So it's a very pop image, it's an image for the transaction in the market, but it also gave me a lot of power to do something, to play or perform something behind that scanner. So if I do something, I've been censored a few times, and that the judgment always keep me away. I am selected, or like by the curators or the organizer for some things, but not for everything. Here I get a freedom and power by myself. I can control myself. I can upload anything, and you are you as a like who is scanning these things. You can only get what is at the back. So this performative power is something that I found different from the traditional performance, physical performance, but being untouchable, being, keeping the social media, I can reach all over the world. So this is another thing I started working. This is a fun movie. How to unmake a paper boat. Well, while we are doing that earning, earning as my medium. Is a very forbidden paper boat. Unfold the back layer downwards. Repeat the same with the front layer. You will now have a triangle shape. Unflatten both sides to make a triangle shape. Unfold corners from the center so that you form a rectangle.
Unfold the rectangle section under the triangle downwards. Repeat the same on the other side. Unfold in half. Unfold a sheet of paper and fold it in full upwards. Pull the sides outwards so it forms a square. A sheet of paper letter sized or A4. Now it is easily eatable by the ocean while crossing by illegal immigrants.
And the glitch. My very recent project with Paul Millen Center in London, I was commissioned to intervene their conference. So over 6 weeks, I made 8 different videos and it appeared during their conference as a boom I want to show a little afterwards, because on the 8th day, when my last glitch appeared, how people reacted, because I was anonymous and nobody knew.
Zoom conferencing system, and each of our panelists has been.
It says that what I tried to do.
There's been a lot of conversation that's happened around those glitches in the chat. Afterwards, people email again saying, "What happened there? Like, is this for real?" And I think we can reveal now that this has been an intervention, as you saw by the artist Mithu Sen, who is part of the Artist Commission program, organises to run through throughout the Untitled Chapter program. And we had a really productive conversation with her before the event started about online conferencing and the spaces of hospitality, digital hospitality that such platforms create.
Well, so this is a little of, I'm not here to give the accountability of what I have done or not. I think I really couldn't do anything. But then when I was trying to gather that with a little bit of guilt, that if I was really into depression, I will not deny, I, like many other of my friends and families, are into deep depression. Many times there are weeks and days just in bed and dark. But then I think then we are here and like an entertainer, like a future clown, like an uncertain, myth of an artist who's holding, in this state of, confused being. But still, we are surviving. So I will not use the word hope, but I think that Darwin's survival for the fittest. Like, we are just here. We are not yet a number, and why not? So that's it.
Thank you. Well, that is very interesting. And Mithu Sen, as ever, was provocative, gossipy, attacking some of the received notions, in many ways expressing embodying creative fury. Maybe now the poet of the fury could take over. Ranjit Hoskote.
Thank you so much, Ashokji. And I'd like to
Yes.
thank the Raza Foundation and the India International Center for this platform. It would have been so much better for us to actually be at the IIC, the marvelous Joseph Allen Stein environment, which I love. But Filhal, here we are. And it's marvelous also to be in conversation here with Mithu and with Sadanand, friends and comrades from different aspects of the ongoing cultural wars, so to speak. And Mithu, thank you very much indeed for your very moving testament of what it's been like to work through and to live through this period. So what I thought I would do is maybe divide my brief presentation into two halves, more or less, or maybe three. We don't have three halves, so 3/3. I'll begin by dwelling a little on what were the key public and planetary urgencies that came through to us, even as we were all dealing with personal grief, a sense of crisis, a sense of loss, the depression, indeed, that Mithu alluded to. I think it was also very clear to most of us that under the camouflage, if you will, the very effective camouflage of a public health crisis, many other urgencies were coming to a head. So I just want to put that in play, and hopefully we'll come back to that in discussion. Because, you know, we speak of this time as the corona age. I think of it as the Covidocene. But I want to flag at least 5 aspects of where we've come as a social formation, both in India and across the world, which really have got much, much worse under the cover of this crisis. So I'll begin with, and in each case, it's a gear shift in social being and political being that seems irreversible and has produced or worsened existing divides. So the first, of course, is ecological devastation. I think for several years, even before 2020, we were all very, very aware that the planet had come to a point of no return. But if you looked around India with infrastructure projects, the effective privatization of forest lands, the change in the Forest Act, the brutal treatment of forest-oriented communities, it was very clear that there was an increasing divide between the profitariat on the one hand and the dispossessed on the other. And meanwhile, no attention at all to the resources of the earth itself, which were being despoliated in a horrible manner. And with absolutely no awareness that there will be costs to be paid. So I want to flag that as something that continues even today. I mean, this is a point where spiritually, as political beings, we all need to pause and ask ourselves where we went wrong. Meanwhile, all these wrongs continue. Then, of course, the notorious, infamous authoritarianism that has taken charge here, but also in many other nation states across the world. There again, you have effectively a circulation of elites. You have newly entrenched elites who bring their resentment, their ressentiment to bear on the practice of the political. So it is not, Pratap Bhanu Mehta in a lecture last week was talking about how you can arrive at a sense of equity and a sense of liberal participation if you take your private resentment and extend it, as he puts it, as a courtesy to others, where you recognize the sense of deficit and exclusion that different kinds of people have, and then you work together to imagine a newer and better world. But that's not what's happening here. There's a privileging of your private or your community sense of rage and resentment and seeming exclusion. And you want to visit that on the heads of everybody else. And you thus marginalize, you dispossess, you annihilate, and render vulnerable other communities. So this is another trajectory that we have lived through, and it has continued unabated through this period of the Covidocene. Then I want to flag the technocratic ascendancy. And And we in the art world have faced each one of these things. How we've responded to them, to what degree, that's another question. I hope we'll discuss it. So in any case, we'd seen the technocratic ascendancy in action. The idea that an expert culture will solve all our problems. We don't really need to have people muddling about and participating in their own fate, because they don't know, do they? They don't know what's good for them. The experts will tell them. Now, in the period of the pandemic and the lockdown, at least to me, as I've seen it and I've experienced it vicariously through what I see around me, this is one of the most dangerous things there is, because it's produced an incredible digital divide, which has been mapped onto the existing caste, class, and gender divides. And several generations are going to pay for what is going on today in terms of how expert culture has privileged a digital divide, and our entire education system, already asymmetric and shambolic, is now going to be mapped along these lines. It's going to exclude the economically weaker sections. It's going to exclude women. And we're going to see more and more of this. And I shudder to think of how this scenario in terms of education, public education, is going to play out in the next few years. Remember that I'm also thinking here of large numbers of people who are our potential interlocutors, Mithu, your viewers, Sadanand, your and my readers. So, you know, these are not abstract crises. We are implicated in them. Then, of course, there's the continuing militarization, the application of military solutions to everything. Once again, an enshrinement of power as a key good, and the complete exclusion of those without power who are dominated. And then there's financialization, where increasingly in a post-industrial kind of scenario, we are operating through financial institutions, through financial agencies, and we increasingly see our world through a financial optic. What that's done is to generate an incredible scenario of regulatory capture. So where all our institutions, which are meant to regulate market actors, in fact serve market actors. So I want to flag all these as very key factors in the world at large and in the world as it impinges on us, because think about the implications of financialization, for instance, in terms of the people we regard as patrons or collectors or supporters of institutions. So there's a very clear thread linking these things. So the ecological devastation, increasing authoritarianism, technocratic ascendancy, militarization, and financialization. To me, these 5 scenarios or scapes or situation predicaments, call them what you will, these are what are increasingly going to define our lives for the next 25 years. And then the manner in which the pandemic and the lockdown have affected us. I come now to part 2. Now, I approach this, of course, in 2 different ways. As a poet, I have one set of reactions. As a curator and a writer on art, I have another set of reactions. As a poet and an essayist, I have to say, and selfish as this sounds, this has been a marvelous time. And I'm not going to shy away from saying that. Very early on in the lockdown last year, we decided to treat it as an extended residency. And it became a moment to retreat into a certain interiority. And much as one might deplore what people are calling imminent Zoom, this online existence has actually allowed for new solidarities and for renewed solidarities across languages, across literatures, across countries, and across time zones. So as a poet, I have experienced a great sense of renewal and strength, because in the end, what are my materials as a poet? Voice, tonality, musicality, mise en page. I can deal with all of these in a scenario like the one we're in right now. So there's, for me, been a sense of revalidation and a certain strengthening, if anything, as a poet. And yet there are disquiets, which I find coming in much more when I think of the visual arts and what has happened there. As a curator and as a writer on the arts, I've led a fairly intermittent kind of life since last March 2020, where physical access to gallery and museum spaces has depended entirely on lockdown protocols whenever access is possible. We began last year, actually March, with a retrospective of the abstractionist Melli Gobai that Nancy Adejanya and I co-curated at the National Gallery of Modern Art in Bombay. It was meant to go on for 3 months. We only had 10 days, just about 8 to 10 days. Barely any viewers were able to come. It was a time of anxiety and uncertainty, and then came the lockdown. So our show essentially sat there in darkness and cold for many months until the institution decided that there was really no point continuing. We're now presenting an extract of it at the Kemold Gallery. But as a retrospective, as the celebration of one of our greatest artists, as a moment when the art world could come together and see this work and respond to it, all those communicative engagements were rendered null and void. And it was a big shock. Once again, this year, remotely for the first time in my life, I curated an exhibition called Patterns of Intensity in Delhi for Art Alive. For me, curating is an absolutely hands-on thing. I have to be in the space, I have to be moving objects myself, drawing, designing, and working with teams and with colleagues. For the first time, I did that over WhatsApp video and Zoom and so on, which I found at first strange. And then I said, well, this is maybe how it's going to be for a while. We are going to have to get used to hybrid experiences of work in the art world. On the other hand, all the invisible functions of the curatorial and writerly life have become very real to me. Working with reserve collections, researching in archives online, preparing for projects that have been deferred and postponed, working on essays. But I'm also, as I do all of this, I'm very, very aware that what we took for granted is the everyday life of the visual arts has completely been diffracted. It's been distorted in some way. And we have had the anxious leisure to observe these things. So I'm going to end by summarizing this in terms of 4 binary oppositions. As far as the viewer is concerned, I think what we're seeing now is really a strong disconnect between what I'm going to call the haptic sense, which we've had all our lives, and the remote sense that we now have. Now, I use the word haptic because it's based on the possibility of touch, not because we actually go and touch art objects, obviously not, but because that's the invitation. I know we're talking about these forms of art as the visual arts, but we haven't always had a sovereign sense of the visual. When I respond to Mithu's work, for instance, it appeals to my linguistic faculty, it appeals to what is tangible, it appeals sometimes to the olfactory, to the auditory. It's a multi-sensory experience. And you can only have that when you are in the presence of an artwork. What has happened with how we experience art now is that there's a certain remoteness. And you have a certain approximation of an artwork. You really feel like you're in Plato's cave in some ways. The artwork is sitting there quietly, far away. You're seeing a digital approximation. And I think that this will have some, I don't know what those effects are, but it's not a full-bodied, multi-sensory experience of the artwork. So even as we're all, not all, many of us seem quite happy with these ideas of online art experience, it's an approximation at best, and I certainly am not happy with it. That brings me to another of my binaries, which is of sociality and dispersal. As an audience, we've always had a certain sociality, and it's not always spelt out. It's not like we're constantly engaging each other in discussion at an opening or later or to walk through. But there are many non-verbal, non-discursive ways in which audiences form themselves, how they engage with works. And as we are dispersed here today, that's not happening. So we are a very dispersed audience. How do we connect? Do we really, I mean, is that chat box going to help us, really? It might, but it might not. You really have to be, I'm sorry to keep harping on this notion of presence and presencing, but I think it's vital that the sociality of the art audience will be affected by the manner in which we are now currently dispersed. That brings me to my 3rd binary, which is the encounter with an object, which really makes that object alive in some way. It animates the object. And what we have now, which is scrutiny. I began to feel this long before the lockdown, when things like Google Arts and many other of these marvelous devices were brought to us. And the pitch would always be, you know what, you can zoom right in, you can see the grain of the canvas, you can see the brush stroke. Marvelous, fantastic, all great. But, you know, I'm not trying to decide whether this is Vermeer or Van Meegeren. So what am I going to do with this kind of super microscopic examination of 1 square inch of a painting anyway? How do I recreate being in a museum in low light, seeing an old master work? How do I recreate actually seeing a work crafted in lead by Anselm Kiefer? There are so many experiences that we all have. How do I get that sense of encounter and how I'm transformed by looking at an object and how that object gets animated? I think that there's a key process of mutual transference between viewer and object, and that cannot happen here, even as we are given guarantees of extraordinarily close scrutiny of the object. Encounter is not scrutiny. And I think that this shift, which I hope is temporary for these times, is something that I at least cannot celebrate it. I would far prefer encounter of this transformative kind to the kind of super scrutiny that we're offered. I think what it does, in fact, is to show us the tragedy of an object that is in solitude. I began earlier by talking about how our Melli Go By exhibition sat in the cold and in darkness. I think that's what is happening here too. Objects are now wrapped in their solitude, and they cannot be animated to us, even though they seem so real and so democratically available. And I'll close by thinking about what this means for a critical climate. The critical climate in India in general is fairly weak and fragile. We do not have, for whatever reason, we did until a comparatively recent date. Sadanand was very much part of that, as was I. There was a critical climate. For several decades now, there's been a certain fragility to that critical climate. But be that as it may, there's a certain dialogic sense that you have when you're together, you're exchanging notes, whether formally or informally. What we now have is a kind of meeting that we have now, which to my mind is somewhat programmatic. How do we share notes with people? How do we develop a sense of what criteria are important? All of the informal penumbras of a real life encounter are missing today. So again, what I've characterized as the dialogic, which comes about through penumbral connections around an exhibition, a studio visit, that's all absented or excluded from the equation. So what happens then to the critical climate? So these are my four grounds of disquiet for the viewer, for the audience, for the presence of the work, and for a critical climate. Thank you for your attention.
Well, I think Ranjit has flagged many important issues: lack of encounter, lack of a physical but social responsiveness to a work of art and things of that kind. And I think it's the right moment when Sadanand Menon should take over and maybe tell us what he thinks about some of these issues. Sadanand.
Yeah, thank you, Ashok, and I think my two previous speaker colleagues, Ranjit and Mithu, have, as expected, really performed brilliantly and laid a kind of a panoramic view of how one understands the present situation from the creative side as well as maybe from a more analytical side. And I'm grateful for the sort of capacious opening out of the space in Ranjit's presentation. This is an unprecedented and not an easily representable moment. Often we think of art as being representative, something that stands for something that, if not speaks for that meaning, at least it throws up another meaning, etc. But the present moment is, I think, distinguished by the fact that it's not easily representable, because it's like an in-between moment in which we are trapped of dismay, depression, desperation, various things that are evident in the life around us. Yet it makes us feel, as both the presenters have made it so clear and so lucid, that it makes us feel the acute condition that fundamentally we are all connected, and obviously the agony is no longer personalized agony. There is something little more universal, little more shared in this moment. So now, in moments of distress, art plays various kinds of roles. It documents, it collectivizes, it plays a morale boosting role. It is given to brooding and to interiority, like Ranjit said. It contributes to sometimes to fresh imaginaries and visions. Sometimes it's like a vanguard. And often in our context, we see a certain acquiescence to power and to authority. And sometimes, in a flash, offering an inspiration. Yet, there is some kind of a ring of self-indulgence, I would say, or even redundancy, when one tries to address a question like art in the time of corona, or a virus, or pandemic. What exactly are we saying here? It's like trying to place art in an event-based niche, as it were, like art in the time of earthquake, or art in the time of cyclone, or art in the time of tsunami, or something. Of course, artists have always responded to turbulence and cataclysms in their own way. One can think of Katsushika Hokusai is iconic, the great wave at Kanagawa that marks the tsunami, the historic tsunami in Japan. Historically, perhaps wars and famines are other big occasions that have drawn the attention of artists. The works of, say, Chitto Prasad or Somnath or Sunil Jana, who have contributed enormously in etching the Great Bengal famine in our collective memory. Or, say, Picasso's Guernica, which has been one of the most influential anti-war statements, and again is quoted and is kind of, represented in front of us in various kind of avatars. So the pandemic and the prolonged global strategies against it, which are in fact strategies that have strengthened the armature of the state, and much of what Ranjit said can be taken in that framework, that in a strange and ironic way, a moment of suffering, a moment of collective pain, a moment of collective despair, a moment of we don't know what it is and we don't know what to do, that kind of moment has contributed to strengthening the state's arms and making it more muscular by isolating people, grounding protests, confinements, containment, quarantine strategies, and a voluntary submission to overarching control, which has perhaps affected certainly the arts economy in one way, but can hardly be said to have affected the artistic imagination. As Mithu Sen's presentation has proved, the artistic imagination is racing ahead of time. It is in fact completely ahead of the pandemic and the virus and whatever its things are. You're of course looking back in the rear view mirror and reflecting some of that, but the imagination has already moved ahead in a very compelling sort of way. And in a peculiar way, art is now forced to rethink its existence and survival as a speculative commodity in the exchequer of supply-side economics, which is what art is in, within quotation, normal times. Unfortunately, it also has a very strong existence and collaboration with capitalistic modes of production and circulation and consumption. And there is this probably the past 18 to 19 months have been a moment when many artists across the world would have had a chance to step back and rethink, their own context and their own position within all this, and to be less concerned about the self. Just 2 days ago, there was a rather wonderful memorial lecture. It's called the Chinta Ravi Memorial Lecture, where lawyer Prashant Bhushan said that the sliding economy of the past 2 years has raised cumulative job losses in India to something like 20%. 20% in the Indian number game is something like 24 crores of people, or 240 million people. 240 million people without jobs, who are all employable age, and many of them are skilled, but they've gone out of job. The number is equivalent almost to the entire population of Uttar Pradesh. Or till probably a decade ago, this would almost have been the entire population of the United States of America. So this is a crisis that doesn't speak back to us in a tangible way. It's something abstract. Some 20% people have lost jobs. So, we are not able to get our imaginary around that. So it will be difficult, if not parasitical, to be processing visuals of the dead and the burning and the floating corpses and so on and so forth. The what Mithu said, it cannot become raw material for artistic production. It will be slightly unfortunate if that's what happens. And yet, can the artist turn away from that? Can you look away? Can we ignore it? No, we can't. So what is the method by which one does not become a vulture in this whole context, and B actually is able to re-energize the flagging morale of a large population of people? So I think we need to therefore step back a little and reflect on what exactly is the change that the pandemic and the lockdown has brought upon visual art practices that anyway usually flourish in isolation. Now, there are multiple layers of effect here, which can be called the individual, the institutional, and the interpersonal. The two sorts of isolation that are obviously, the two sorts of isolations are not obviously the same. The artist working in isolation and an artist who is kind of forced into a certain kind of self-isolation. So these are two different things we're talking about. And significant changes in art practice in a period like this are bound to lead to changes in viewership and consumption patterns too. So the way I'm seeing it from my perch, I'm also including here certain experience in the performing art world, etc. That imperceptibly there is a definite spatial transformation that is affecting our perception. It's kind of happening in front of our eyes without probably or realizing it in a day-to-day manner. The virtual is no longer something ethereal or absent or abstract, but now the very substance of a new materiality. It leaves its footprints all across our present moment and compels us to become acutely aware of our saturated data infrastructure. One can even see it as an inevitable extension or mutation of visual perception that was set in motion with the arrival of photography. You can take it back even what is happening to the art exposition in a virtual space today. With the arrival of photography, you had a flattening of time and a virtualization of space. What in conceptual terms we can call probably a tension between spatial immediacy and temporal anteriority. The virtuality of arts practice today is perhaps the product of that now 170 years old journey in visual practices, in which depth of field has been steadily retracting back to now manifest as mere surface. And this is a process and a phenomena, a paradigm if you want, which needs to be investigated a little more closely by practicing artists themselves. What does this flattening mean? What does this presence of themselves as mere surface meet. I think it will take some time for us to get our grips on what exactly is going on here. Now, as our everyday lives become increasingly entangled with data technologies and their assemblages and their various assemblages, and Ranjit did refer to this, our routines are shifting to ever more virtual forms of exchange, moving from traditional physical modes of interaction to a more, let's say, cloud-based lifestyle, which has enormous implications for not only how we live in the world, but also for how artists conceive, order, and produce space. From the entertainment devices that we carry in our pockets to the proliferation of cameras, sensors, actuators, and other embedded computational machine learning systems, radical changes are occurring to space from the home to the cosmos via the deployment and integration of digital technologies. And whether the artist likes it or the visual artist likes it or not, willy-nilly, by the sheer fact that one is pulled into this digital space, you get implicated in it, you get entangled in it. This intervention and interference in more humanly ordered aesthetic processes is so severe that the Norway-based artist and architect Joar Nango, who works with the cultures of the approximately 80,000 strong indigenous community of the Finno-Ugric lineage called the Sami in the Arctics. He recently said, and I'm quoting him, "Our interest is in fucking up the Eurocentric energy of the art world that surrounds us." These are strong words. And in a strange way, this entire digital space and what has emerged, even though we see it as a globalized and universalized networking thing which makes the entire planet one and so on, there is a undeniable Eurocentricity here, which artists from this part of the world need to figure out and need to find ways of either transforming or re-inscribing from their own positions. I find Mithu's work doing precisely that, being vernacular, being unabashedly local and let's say desi in one sense. And maybe we need to engage with it in that manner, to not get seduced by the sophistication of this new instrumentation around us. And the COVID-19 pandemic has attacked not only individual bodies, but our collective bodies as well. And according to some philosophers, the COVID pandemic acts like a magnifying glass that exposes and magnifies the more dire antagonisms in contemporary societies, from rising social inequality and the increased exploitation of women to contemporary forms of racism. It's hard to judge if COVID-19 also amplified latent and already visible antagonisms within the art system all around the world. And this is once again something that the art community needs to step back and to re-figure and re-investigate and re-understand. One could argue that the lockdown and the standstill brought to light certain vulnerabilities in the art system, especially the precarious positions of many artists and other workers in art institutions, many of whom were laid off and denied compensation or left without labor protections because they were in flexible and freelance positions. And this is such a tragic story in India that it's amazing that within our sparse media, no reflection was made on this. I mean, just that one little statement about Ranjit of Meli Gobai's exhibition, Sitting in Solitude of the NGMA, it also meant that the entire set of personnel who were in the NGMA were also sitting in solitude in their homes. And it's like a strange disconnect in the art economy that unfortunately has not been reflected upon enough. what this semi-employed, semi-freelance kind of people do when they go out of job. On the other hand, without audiences and global events that usually invigorate the art world, the pandemic did enable the possibility for many cultural workers, including artists, critics, writers, and all those who engage in arts discourse, to take a step back and analyze some intriguing conditions in the art sphere that point to broader socio-political phenomena and connectivities. Definitely, it gave space and time to poets and to say writers like me who don't necessarily bounce off objects, but who reflect more on phenomena. And so that gives it a certain luxury opens out. Nobody's pressurizing you. Even phone calls have stopped. And you know very well that for the next 1 week, you're not going to go out of the house, etc., etc. And that becomes, as at some point in a strange way, a luxury. Unfortunately, a compelling and a seductive luxury, because it also prevents you from wanting to step out and state your opposition to many of the things that are happening. The COVID-19 pandemic has included mass social mobilization towards a mutually accountable separation from one another. Its bioethics sees each of us as potentially vulnerable or dangerous vectors. This is not wrong, but the wrong lessons might be drawn from this. The epidemiological model of society shows us not as a singular and discrete being, but rather as being part of a plurality. Looking towards a post-pandemic politics, and this is what we need to do probably increasingly now to reflect a little bit more on a post-pandemic politics. The problem of over-individuation within the systems we use to model ourselves is compounded by the physical isolation that each of us experiences in extended rhythms of lockdown. The situation has brought new cultural and interpersonal realities, many of them unfamiliar and uncomfortable, such as the tense choreography of social distancing and vocabularies of, and this is emerged from the academia, the term touchlessness. We are not calling it untouchability, it's being called touchlessness. And the mass manufactured, what I'm calling an aerosol bubble distance. I want to be as safely away from your aerosol as you want to be safely away from my aerosol spray. And that's become the new social distance. And it's a very peculiar distance to have, because it's an invisible bubble, and you never know when these bubbles meet and make love to each other. So it's become an extremely precarious condition to be in. So, for example, the mask that we are all wearing, and I'm not wearing here because I'm all alone here. Hopefully the screen will not absorb my aerosol and spread it to all of you, but the mask is not just the containment of an individual body, but a collaborative device that mediates the proxemic relationship between two or more of us, because we are always touched by one another's exhalations. The mask constitutes a deliberate withdrawal of space between us, which can profoundly affect both interpersonal relations as well as artistic practices. I think, again, this bears some kind of a serious reflection as to how the enforced distanciation between individuals in a collective is going to create a new form of discourse, artistic discourse, most likely, but also a new form of cognitive discourse that is going to affect us in some kind of a broad and sort of epiphanic way in one sense. Now, how when each of us is forbidden to touch, can a renewed sense of biopolitical entanglement emerge? It may come through a recognition that societal care is not personal, face-to-face and skin-to-skin experience, but something that also happens at a distance through impersonal systems upon which each of us relies. These two are social relations. Impersonality is also a social relation. So it engineers a suppression of the sociality of relations we all hold with one another as part of a common biological and technological world. There is an invisible suppression that's happening. There's an obvious suppression in the kind of militarization and those kind of flag words that Ranjit brought up. But there is also a subliminal suppression that is happening in what was otherwise considered a normal biological sphere. It is a belief that drags attention away from mutuality to a more privatized communicative experience. Now, this feeling of hyperinflation of aesthetics within a hyper-reduced space, which is what I think many artists are experiencing at the moment, and hyperinflation of the need for aesthetic performance within a hyper-reduced space was reinforced for me by experiencing, and I'm sure for many of you, you must have seen this, experiencing the digital Hussein, an artificial intelligence experience created by the Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore a couple of months ago, when a disembodied but virtually present MF Hussein was made to respond to a smattering of questions by bemused visitors. Both the artist and the art practice reach their inevitable reduction to something akin to a video game. And we need to be very alert to whether this is the direction in which art during these times is going to be moved. So I think I will stop here. Basically, I would like to say that a privatized subjectivity that we are all forced into today and the attendant hyper-interiorized individuation hinges on a commitment to the authenticity and efficacy of effect. This embraces the notion that a preferred personal narrativization of the world can, and in fact should, take priority over the cold reality of the planet and its indifferent biochemistries. It is the culture in the culture war. We need to recapture that culture. We cannot just become biology. We need to recapture that space of culture. It is not only part of the psychology of the pandemic, it characterizes the rise of populism that now, holding on to power, has mismanaged the responses to the pandemic so fatally. It's very difficult to attribute blame in this situation. The easiest target, of course, are our so-called governors up there. But there has been a mismanagement on many fronts, including our own understanding of the situation that we've been going into. And I think both Mithu's work and Ranjit's work has pointed to that very clearly. So artists, no doubt, have to be at the forefront of imagining a post-pandemic environment that can recover our deeply eroded humanity at this moment. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sadanand. You have covered a wide range and raised many issues. I'm struck by the saying that the visuality may become the new materiality in a certain sense. Now, if the three panelists would like to say something to each other, they are welcome to do so. Ranjit, do you have something to say to Sadanand or go ahead.
No, a great deal, actually. I think it's been an amazing series of reflections, and I want to respond particularly to what Sadanand was just saying, but it also riffs off of experiences that Mithu shared, and very, very struck by this formulation that Sadanand just shared with us, the hyperinflation of artistic experience in hyper-reduced spaces. That's just something I want us to dwell on and see the consequences for, how does one transmit affect? How does one make common ground, as we do in all the arts? I mean, what we're trying to do is create that intermediate space between object or performance or screening and whoever's receiving it. What's that space of interplay? How does it unfold in normal times? And what do we do now when many of these conditions of mutuality are withheld? And we're all in this kind of enforced privatism, with only certain senses or certain experiences heightened, like this kind of, in some ways, discursive. And as both Sadanand and Mithu were speaking, I kept thinking, I see it from the arts that I'm closest to. But what does it do to theater? And I know colleagues in theater have been fighting valiantly with this, but what does it do to dance? What does it do to music? I think each of the arts is going to have to struggle with these questions in possibly different ways and move to some new solution. But in each case, confronting the fact that this might well be our new materiality. I just wanted to express my responses.
I think Mithu can answer this in a more convincing way, but I just want to add one thing. Along with the community of artists, also let's please consider the poor classroom teacher as an artist.
Yes, indeed.
I think teaching in school, in college, wherever, in institutions, teaching is a highly performative act.
Yeah.
And reduced of that performativity, what happens to the now virtual classroom is a travesty of a kind which we are not able to imagine yet. I think it will take another 3-4 years for the effects of this to manifest.
Clearly.
It's quite frightening. So, Mithu,
yeah.
Yes, Mithu, would you like to say something?
Wow. So, like in my practice for last couple of years, one thing I was definitely noticing that a fear of being dated in terms of compared to this, the new generation, the new take, and all these things. And it's not just me, but it's the entire generation. Then I saw my 81 years old dad, like, who is disabled for last 5 years, but still adapting how to call his kids, like my mom and dad, like the WhatsApp video call, being alone, playing in a computer cards, So it gives me a kind of strength, and at the same time, what Sadanand was telling about thinking about the space, the surface. I was from the beginning was very, very often, disagreed with this online exhibition and online things, because it's completely like almost like we are abusing this medium, this the screen, by just documenting what we are used to do. We somehow, I think that we really have to forget the past life we lived, or we have to redefine. So what really made me think a few years back about when I was Googling myself, and all I found that typical and and I would just undeniably, it's also me, but not the entire me. So I took me as a reference, and I started Googling my identity, and then I found it's a projection, it's a judgment, or it's through what maybe the Eurocentric, what Sadanand Menon, or somebody, some market, some invisible market, that algorithm, the AI is playing behind all these things. And that's how our whole human psychography is playing. So how to subvert that? So I once tried to subvert my own Wikipedia page. I didn't even know that exists. And then my nephew said, and then I used some interns, like a very young intern, because I don't know the technology, but that whole techno myth about creating that identity of an artist or myth, how I can, deconstruct that. So I changed my year of birth. I put some imaginary exhibition in my biodata, and it stayed. It was like unnoticed for a couple of weeks or months. And I went to like to a presentation. I showed the online my Wikipedia page where I was born in 1917, which is not really, sometimes some data like doesn't even take. Like if I say I was born in 1770, it will not take, because no human being can. So it is. But if you can do that 1917, it still you can live for 100 years or 104 years. So you have to really play the tricks, and I found that kind of playing, the creating strategy and playing tricks is really. So I changed my Wikipedia page. I changed the image, and it became unnoticed. So how blindly we trust this kind of authentic platforms, Wikipedia or Google, that we have to first question, because nothing is as reliable, as this kind of things that we blindly, and that is the myth, and that is the construct we are already overpowered. It's a baggage. So the COVID is actually giving us a time not only to, to enjoy the beautiful that solidarity, the romantic time, because for me it is not. Because for me it is romantic as long as I know it's a vacation for a certain period. When I know that this is kind of an endless, and only with the hope of someday it will come, and it will, and not like third wave, fourth wave, fifth wave like this, where I cannot even see my old parents for 18 months. So it really, really disturbs me, and it really makes me so hopeless. My biological body does not, it's not really ready to accept it anymore. And there is the helplessness, and because I can see my parents are saying don't come, so that helplessness, because they are 8 years old, their dates are limited. I can think like another life after this age maybe, but so that kind of the whole crisis of the whole human psychology is changing, and we have to redefine everything. I just feel sometimes like sitting with the Google and change all the definitions I have. I just Google it and no autocorrect. My using on is also for that. I like to prefix this on, before any kind of word and object, because I'm not coming from that language background, and I use that kind of vernacular play, so that I can use it as a joke, and I can take the control. I can critique the dominant power, and it's everywhere. Today we cannot even go and vote a system, like trusting that the vote is going. We don't know the algorithm. We don't know if it is a bioware or it is something like this already is happening. We don't know that if somebody is trying to sell something. So these are already all constructed in our myth, and we are blindly accepting. And I just think that not like as an artist, but as a political conscious citizen, as much as we can absorb the situation, take it like skin deep, where we are extremely vulnerable, accept that insecurity and the fear, anxiety, agony, and the vulnerability, and just react. We may not have any more term called painting. I'm sorry for all the old masters in the museum. I may not, or maybe the next generation will never be able to go and see the Impressionist Museum in Paris, or see Giacometti in person. But the whole, we have to think like that we are already in some, we put in ourselves in that time machine, and we see the whole situation from hundred of years from here, or from the different planet, like an alien. We really have to imagine ourselves. We have to throw ourselves in that kind of vulnerability, and then if we still survive, if we are surviving, and I think I'm quite privileged and blessed, and I'm really happy, because as a human being, I'm experiencing a time which is a lifetime thing. I don't know if it is a positive comment, or it's a despair, like depression, but it is what I am experiencing, and I'm not yet processed. not yet articulated, and I'll never be, I think, in my lifetime, because the amount of things, the experience I went through personally and collectively, I don't think in my lifetime, if I live another 20, 30 years, that I will be able to, because I already have a collective memory of my past life with my emotions, upbringing, everything, and which is my base. So I don't know what is waiting for the next generation, but as an artist, as a concert, being with the cognitive and the sensory power, I think there will always be a process. Market will catch up. I really don't care about the market, because market is too smart. They will, if NFT can come, there's something else will come. So that is not our concern. We have to be skilled in any way, like either teaching, either doing something, taking workshops to survive. We are too pampered. Some artists, some art world is like selling artwork and thinking that this is what we are surviving for. No, we have parallel things. We have seen people, we have seen migrant laborers are walking 1,500 kilometers. So I am privileged. COVID gave us a very interesting, like scenario, or like even if I am privileged sitting inside the house in the summer and thinking that the outside the house who is in the street, maybe he will be affected by COVID. No, it's not that. Like you said, that aerosol. How long we can keep? I want touch. I want this physicality, tactility. As Ranjit said, yes, of course, it has a meaning. We are just responding as an artist, whether it's a QR code or the social media. Everything has an effect, but it's just holding the time. But otherwise, yeah, please, Sadanand, I got.
Thank you, Mithu. That was wonderful. I have a question specifically for Ranjit. When he talked about in his presentation of regulatory captures, I think it's a very important term to engage with, and particularly in the context of the art world or the world of imagination and creativity. In the coming time, politically, of course, we are in a you yourself defined it an authoritarian elite sort of a mind. On top of it, there is a facilitation for that coming from things like the COVID regulations and the quarantines and so on. Now, this regulatory capture that the artist community is also subject to, what will be, I'm asking you this because you are much more connected with the visual art world in terms of curatorial connections and exhibitions and galleries and so on, and the artist community, larger artistic community itself. What do you think will be a emerging strategy, a possible strategy to either retort against this kind of regulatory capture, or at least bypass it, or override it, or subvert it? You see something happening in this?
Yeah, thank you, Sadanand. I have actually been, well, I have to say, with certain anxieties about this question, because what might it mean if the power to transgress, which is what the imagination is really all about, the artistic imagination, what if that itself gets somehow domesticated, quarantined, contained, and made to articulate certain dominant dogmas? What if the institutions where you might hope to present your work to a larger national audience, what if those institutions are either captured in some ways or rendered inert? Now, this seems to be the spectrum that's happening. Fortunately, so far, it's more the inertness of institutions rather than their being captured that we are up against. But I think there's also an invitation in this situation for all of us, artists, people connected to the arts, to think about alternative platforms and alternative institutions. I don't have an immediate answer to what those forms are, but I think we're being asked to also just reconceive ourselves as, we always say we're the art community, but what exactly does that mean? What are our platforms? What are the alternative venues? What are the new starting points? And I think there's a lot there that we need to explore, which will also involve questions of empathy of the kind you were drawing attention to. It's also an invitation to step away from the star system, from the artist-fixated understanding of the art ecology, and to recognize other disquiets. I don't want to go into the particular cases, because some of them were pretty gruesome, which showed us what this kind of narcissistic star system can do, particularly as art has, expanded at a certain kind of scale and has involved many other sorts of specialists and colleagues and artisans. How do they, if they're rendered anonymous, how are they to be acknowledged? How are they to be acknowledged in terms of authorship, in terms of how they're credited, how they're paid, to put it bluntly? I think there's all that side of the art world, which also we have a good moment now to engage with those questions. And I also do want to thank you for raising those questions of labor in an art system which we see to be premised entirely on capital and spectacle. So I think these are all key questions, and they're all interrelated. So it might also mean for us a certain change of scale, to get away from, gigantism of spectacularization, to move away from that, and to also think about how we engage more closely with our audiences. What new forms of critical language do we evolve? I think that these are going to be among the challenges that we have before us. And also, Sadanand, I also want to respond to what you were saying about pedagogy, because that's something that I have actually been deeply worried by, thinking about, the children of relatives and friends, to see how they've been struggling with these questions. But my heart always goes out to the teacher, taken away from a clear dramaturgy of what it means to teach, to then be exposed. And in some cases that I've heard of, it's incredibly brutal, because the teacher, just like the students, is trying to understand how to deal with this kind of dispersed, remote teaching experience. And then you have parental figures who come in really as nothing but consumers, saying you're not providing the services we would like. The kinds of brutalization, I think, that's brought to the classroom situation, I don't know what this is going to mean when students finally do go back to their classes. How is that dramaturgy of teaching to be renewed?
There's also surveillance. Sorry to interrupt, but along with
brutalization,
there's also parental surveillance. The kids are sitting at home.
Yes.
And 20, 21, 22-year-olds, the parents are sitting next to them and carrying out a surveillance of the teacher. What is this teacher saying?
Exactly.
And is he saying something politically incorrect? And these poor kids at 21, 22 are being subject to that kind of censorship. Not to speak of the persons.
Yeah.
I've gone through this.
Yeah, absolutely. So also the areas that we felt, the domains like the academic, where we customarily think this is the space of inquiry and free thought, it's all closing in.
Right, Ashok, I think you can open out, maybe.
Well, friend, it's a very interesting discussion. There are many issues which have been raised. And I think this was the main purpose, to have a conversation like this. Because even the artists sometimes are not aware what are the deeper implications of art practice, the ecology of art, the politics, and the rest of it. So I think we have covered a very large area. There are no answers, but at least in the times when questions are derided upon, we have raised some urgent questions with the necessary intellectual and creative fury behind them. Many, should there be a change in the critical language? Should there be different forms of social mutuality? Would there be greater individualism forced upon us? Would there be social responsibility derided upon, etc.? These are issues which we must keep in mind, whether we are art lovers, art critics, or artists. And I think we are very grateful to all the three, Mithu Sen, Sadanand Menon, and Ranjit Hoskote, to have taken part in this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashok.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. It's really been marvelous to be here, to be part of this Samvad.
Bye bye. Bye, Mithu.